Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you're joining. My name is Lalit. I'm going to be your host for this evening for discussions around taking testing seriously. The event is organized by Accenture's Quality Talk. It's a series of expert talks and discussions around different theme topics that we regularly organize. And today, we have a very good reason and a very good, rather very important topic to discuss with a very special guests on the panel. Today, we have Michael Bolton with us. He's a lead consultant at Develop Sense and one of the co-authors of the book, Taking Testing Seriously. We have Karen today. She's lead engineer with Wordly. I believe, Karen, you are already a seasoned testing expert when I started as a junior tester 18 years back. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have James Bach, CEO and principal consultant at Satisfies, also the creator of Rapid Software Testing Framework. And we also have Maaike Brinkhof. She's test consultant and owner at Sensibly, joining us from Netherlands.
Yep, that's right.
Lovely. And I'm Lalit. I'm working with Accenture Song as productivity engineering manager and also with Accenture as its thought leader for quality engineering EMEA region. It's an honor to have all of you today. Thank you so much for joining. For those who don't know what we are going to talk about through taking testing seriously, the idea of this particular theme struck to me because I started reading Taking Testing Seriously, the book that is recently launched by James Burke, Michael Bolton, and together with some of the amazing people who have contributed their chapters and thoughts. I believe, particularly in the age of AI, where things are getting way more interesting and complicated and funny and annoying and amusing at the same time, I believe there couldn't be any better time for a book like this to be launched. So what we are going to discuss today is not just really the book, but the very topic of taking testing seriously. With that, I will ask my first question to James. Unfortunately, we don't see him, but we can hear him. James, I have started reading the book. I'm not fully done with it. But the book emphasizes on escaping the echo chamber of best practices and rather focus on critical thinking, practice real testing.
That's
Based on
right.
your long experience in the field, which best practices, the worst best practices you think organizations are still clinging to, and how testers can break free from this dogmatic process oriented thinking?
I think test cases. I think if I want to, the simplest, quickest way, just test cases. There are testers in the world. There are testers. I think most testers, I would say, probably the majority of testers, working software testers in the world, actually think that their job is to write test cases. They think that's their job. They think that that's what testers do. They write test cases, which is a lot like saying, like, what do cops do? Cops shoot bad guys. It's like, what does a child think that a policeman does? We
Mm-hmm.
shoot the bad guys. It's a child's way of thinking about testing to say we
Mm-hmm.
write test cases. I've written test cases. I but not many compared to the number of years that I've been a tester. What I do is I test. That's what I do. I test the product. I investigate the product. And if that means that I create an artifact that looks to someone like a test case, then that's just a side effect of my attempt to test the product well. And it's usually a side effect of me preparing for regression testing. That's where in my work, uh, test cases show up more often. Another kind of best practice is, although it's not really, it's sort of a best practice concept, you might say, I'd call premature formalization. The idea that we've got to formalize what we're going to do, as if you were gonna run a company, do you think that people who start companies, do you think Elon Musk every day before he gets out of his sleeping bag and gets up and dusts himself off and starts his working day at, I assume, 5 in the morning after having gone to sleep the previous night, in quotes, at 3:30 a.m. Uh, you think what he does is go, okay, I have to get to work. The first thing I'm going to do is write down everything I'm going to say today before I say it. I have to make sure that I never improvise a response to someone, but instead I must write it all down and then read from a little card. And that way, whenever anyone says anything to me, I've got a little card that I can read from. Nobody treats their job like that. No, nobody at all. I mean, even musicians don't treat their job like that. But maybe as the closest thing would be a musician might treat their job like that. I've got
I
a, in a,
can
in,
I can I can attest to the fact that no musician would ever do
I
that.
remember seeing a Broadway play with Michael Bolton, and I was watching the conductor conduct the music for the play. And I saw him have take a pen and write on the score while he was conducting the thing. I mean, he was still adjusting things and changing things in the midst of a performance. Even they do this. And so this that's a quote best practice. There's lots of people who don't really understand testing think that the most important thing is you have to lock down what you're going to do to test and never change it. And you got to do that as fast as possible, as soon as possible. That's what the professionals do. No, that's what people who hate testing do. People who want to get testing, quote, over with as fast as they can so that they can move on to what they really like to do, which usually is designing a product. And they treat testing as something they want to get over with as fast as possible because they hate it. And so they point to test cases and they point to their formal documents and they say, see, check that off. Check that off the list. So I think those are the most harmful kinds of best practicey things people fall into in testing. What do you rest of you think?
Thank you, James.
Well,
I would ask Maaike to add your thoughts on this one. I read some of your writings that kind of advocates I'm not a test case writer. How? No, okay, maybe I got it wrong. But how? What do you think about this?
about the use of test cases?
About the so-called best practice and obsession with test cases that James just spoke about?
Well, it's been a horrendous obstacle in my 15-year career, not in me, but because other people expect testing to use these things. And
Mm-hmm.
if you tell them that you don't need them, you're almost breaking their brains. So I have to spend a lot of time explaining to people and showing to people how you can do testing without test cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually ends up, um, I can change their mind. Most people, I can change their mind by showing them and doing it with them. But I mean, um, I would lie if I say it hasn't been a burden at times to have to spend time doing that, because it means that I have to spend time away from my main mission. But on the other hand, I have come to also enjoy being a teacher
Mm-hmm.
instead of only a tester. I'm also now a testing teacher, I guess. And yeah, I guess it's part of the job.
Understood. Thank you. And you have worked extensively also, I guess, in regulated software environment. What is your take on this one? Can we get rid of test case writing obsession, or we still need it in some cases?
I have lots of opinions. I could probably fill the airways on this, but um, I want to go backwards to something that James said, and I want to point out a way to think about this So it's not the only way, but a way to think about this is the question gets to be why, right? So why do we think some people think test cases are it? And I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one is baggage. I've actually been coming to a place of realizing that most people have experienced testing somewhere else they worked, and whatever they experienced, it was probably pretty classical as defined by test cases, test strategy, execute. We don't want anything else. So they bring that baggage with them, otherwise known as their past experience, and they don't articulate it. They just, I've actually had people say to me, I know how testing works. Oh, okay, great. Have you ever worked as a tester? Most of the time, the answer is no. But this is an interesting thing. So when we look at like this burden placed on us, we might want to think about the why. Like, why is it happening? It happens in part, I think, because people bring that past experience, and so they expect it to be the same as somewhere else that worked. There's another reason too, and I think this needs to be looked at, and I think this would open up a whole fascinating conversation that I would probably sit back and just listen to James and Michael riff on this because they'd improvised, right? Control. If I tell you exactly what to test and I tell you exactly what the outcome's going to be, then all you have to do is go do the thing. And so there are people who really want to control the testers. They want to control people and what they're doing and how they're thinking and how they're spending their day. And they want to control the outcome. I have worked at places that's like, we're going to ship this, but you should test. But don't find anything because we already have a date. And so if you find anything, you're impacting the rest of the game plan. And so when you start to think about like, why does this happen? I mean, I can't understand a tester who would want a job of just executing test cases all day long. I mean, it sounds incredibly boring. But I think if you look at the reasons why it happens, now you've got a different, you have different problems to solve. It's not necessarily getting rid of the test cases, it's dealing with some of these other things in the environment. I'm going to stop there because, yeah, I'll stop there.
Understood. Thanks. So that leads me to my next question, and I would like Michael to take it. Michael, you have wrote a lot about test case, how to break the test case addiction and the obsession, and you also often talk about tacit knowledge, explicit knowledge. And I believe the book, Taking Testing Seriously, also discusses about appreciating and developing this tacit knowledge. But in my experience, and I'm sure you know it too, organizations typically want everything codified, documented, repeatable. They want some training material to, hand over and train the next testers if somebody leaves. So how do we honor that both the tacit and intuitive aspects of testing and also meet the organizational needs for this transparency and knowledge transfer? How do we find the right balance here?
Well, the whole notion of tacit knowledge is that it's tacit, right? It's unstated. It is not explicit. So let's look at how tacit knowledge gets transferred in other domains, in the fields of science, in medicine, in construction work. Tacit knowledge gets developed by doing the work in the presence, very often when it's a socially oriented work, it's in the presence of the people who are doing the same kind of work, the people who are requesting that work, and the people who are experiencing the outcomes of that work. In other words, the world gives us feedback about what's being done. Now, it'd be lovely if all of our experience could be rendered into a string of bits. And it would be lovely if somebody could just read that string of bits and automatically know what other people have known all this time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? And there's only one problem with it, though. which is it doesn't work. That's because there's certain things in the world that cannot be codified, encoded. All right. So there's some things that we can write about. There are some instructions that we can give to machines. But what is really required, and anybody who is running a company knows this tacitly, they don't know it explicitly because they've never really thought about it, is they have learned to do what they do, only a tiny fragment by what has been written down. Mostly, it's a constant stream of interaction between themselves and the world. So, trouble with the idea of encoding everything is, well, it's twofold. One is everything. What's everything? The other trouble with it, it's very expensive to encode something more explicitly. More explicitly, more time it takes, more effort it takes. I would say if you want cultural transformation, you asked about persistence, right? How do we keep the stuff that is in the culture? That is immerse people in the culture.
Okay.
That means talking to each other. That means working with each other. If they talk with each other and work with each other, they learn from each other on how stuff gets done, and they develop ways of doing things collectively. So for that, I would refer almost immediately to the work of Harry Collins in his books, Rethinking Expertise, Tacit and Explicit Knowledge, Changing Order, The Shape of Actions. All of these books influence my ideas on how people learn stuff. And
Can I give another example, Michael, that get you to comment on it? Okay, yeah. I play blues harmonica. I've played blues harmonica with you, and I'm pretty good. I've played on stage.
Can confirm.
In shows that people put flyers out for. I'm pretty good blues harmonica player. Now, someone might say, "Oh, you play blues harmonica? That must mean you write music." And I go, no, I've never written music in my life. I don't read music. I don't write music. Well, how do you play notes if you don't write music? Well, I guess you could say in a manner of speaking, I write music in the sense that I compose it on the fly from a set of heuristics in response to what I'm hearing other musicians do and the kind of song we're playing. In a sense, you could say that you could sort of squint and say I'm real-time writing music. And in the same sense, you could say, well, of course I'm writing test cases. In a manner of speaking, everything I do when I'm performing testing, you could say, oh, I choose to consider that a test case, James. Like, okay, but that's not at all what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is I'm feeling the music of testing. I'm working with heuristics. I'm developing my ideas in real time, and then that turns into evidence. So what I'm essentially saying is test cases aren't a very helpful analogy or metaphor or a concept that helps you understand what I'm doing when I test. I don't know about you, Michael. Do you read music, or do you also, like me, just sort of have learned it by feel?
I read music. I read music haltingly, but I can tell you, I mean, I spend several nights a week at Irish traditional music sessions, and it's actually a lot like software testing in this sense. It's actually going by too quickly for anybody to read it off the page. That's not happening at an Irish traditional session, certainly. Now, what's interesting about that is they're very strong patterns in runs of notes and musical phrases and stuff. And there is an immense repertoire of tunes that a good player knows. A typical reasonable player of Irish trad music will know something between 500 and 2,000 tunes practically immediately, off the top of their heads. And they'll pick up on a new tune really quickly because of those patterns and structures that are in there. But the notes are viewed by trad people as useful for preserving kind of thing at certain kinds of memory and archives and stuff. But you'll never see anybody reading musical notation. But what they will be reading is the room, right? The other players. They'll be reading that in a metaphorical sense.
It's quite an interesting example because I was just reflecting on how did I ever learn to play musical instrument, because just like you, James, I don't read music, I don't write it, but I can play musical instrument just by ear. And while I was
I'm sorry to interrupt. There is one thing that we've been doing. We've all been doing this. I tried to catch myself at it. You don't read musical notation, right? Yeah, there's a difference between music and musical notation, and that's what's key here. That's the thing. When we talk about music, sometimes we say, "Hey, I left my music on the music stand," but that's not the music, right? And our language invites that in a way. Yeah.
So that makes me reflect on how we learn. And I remember, Karen, you have written an entire chapter in the book about technical work is all about learning. And I was wondering, given your experience in co-founding REST workshop years ago, and your expertise in regulated software testing, how do you think learning work in highly controlled environments works really? So do regulations help foster that learning, or they restrict testers from learning better?
Regulated environments are really different. You could work in software testing for years and never work in a regulated environment. I did. More than a decade, and until I was in a regulated place. I think one of the things I learned is that I don't think a regulated environment helps you learn or keeps you from learning. I think instead it's another whole layer that has to be added in. So in addition to the work that you've done, you somehow have to show it, prove it. I was actually sent to FDA auditor training years ago, and the short version that at the time my manager had said to me is you have to document what your process is and then do it and document it. And so, if in other words, if you find a bug and you've got nothing written down on like exploring that situation, that scenario, then an audit is going to ask, well, how did you come to that idea? And, you might be in a situation where you have to retroactively explain how you got down a certain pathway and what you found. But I think one of the things in regulated environments, and this isn't true everywhere, it really depends on where you are and sort of the mentality of the people you're working with. But, hopefully we have really good quality and we pass the audit. But there are people, and there is an opportunity to fall into the obsession with just passing the audit. And when we just pass the audit and we're less concerned about what the quality really looks like, then we're back into where we started a few minutes ago with test cases are the only way to go and highly documented, what did James call it? Premature formulation. And we see this in regulated environments where they really want to have it all very buttoned up. And then we're in the execution phase, and then we prove it, and then we ship it, and that kind of thing. But I think what we're not giving space for is you don't know what you might find in the moment. And I wouldn't want to think of regulations as holding back learning. It can stilt it because you get into a situation where there is that desire to pass the audit, and there is that desire, like I said a moment ago, about controlling people and controlling the outcome. And it can be, truthfully, it can be a little bit uncomfortable when there is a late find in a regulated environment. This is going to sound like I'm trying to push something I wrote, which is not the point at all, because it's quite old, but the story of it is really true. There was a book, Beautiful Testing, and I wrote about medical software that I worked with. And there were some of us on the project who just felt like something wasn't right. And we had distinct things we had seen. It wasn't just like, oh, something's not right. It's like, I think this is off. I think that is off. I think I saw a problem with this. And we were in that regulated environment. And the beauty, it really was. I mean, I look back and I think so well of it. The beauty was we did something about it. We said, okay, we're just gonna like let the press keep rolling, right? We're gonna keep going on execution, but we're gonna grab a handful of us and we're gonna go off and do some exploratory testing. We'll figure out the documentation, but this product has to be right. Its worst outcome was someone could die. And we all felt a responsibility. So I think sometimes too, it gets down into the integrity of the people that you're working with and what the ultimate goal is. Is it to ship? Is it to pass an audit? Is it to figure out the state of the product? You start to find out what people's ultimate goal is when the pressure comes on. And testing is always in that end of the cycle. I don't care if it's agile, I don't care if it's like testing is always in the mix at the very end of things. And it's an interesting time frame, and it adds to the situation.
Thank you. James, I have a question for you. I was just wondering, reflecting on insight shared by Karen, and you have done a lot of trainings for RST, James, Michael. I believe organizations typically confuse the training and the learning aspect, particularly for testers. What is your advice, or how taking testing seriously as a book can help eliminate that confusion?
You mean there's a confusion between training and learning?
Yes.
Well, I suppose there is, because our training that we do lasts a few days. But there's no way that somebody can take our training and at the end of a few days be a tester like Karen or Maaike. It doesn't work that way. What we try to do with our training is to show you a path that the learning is to walk the path. The training is we're showing you the path that you have to walk, and you're going to have to practice. And we want to, and without the training, you'll be going in circles. You'll be having to solve a maze. It took me a good 10 years of really trying hard to figure out what is it that I need to learn to be a good tester. And after about 10 years, I had pretty much figured out what I need to learn. And then I had to get on to learn that. But I didn't have anybody to save me 10 years of wandering around in circles. At one point I thought I have to read every standard. So I read all the standards associated with software testing. I have to read all the testing textbooks. So I read every testing textbook, every single one that I could find in the English language, and read them looking for clues. Now, I can tell people like most of those textbooks do not help you learn testing. Now I know that. So I try in my training to save people time and set them on a path that then they must walk. And that's the learning process, is to walk that path. We try to do this in our book as well. That's why we have like a 62-page chapter called How to Do a Test. Imagine that, like How to Do a Test. That's the title of the chapter. And what are we talking about for 60 pages? And where we go through this stuff in a bunch of little tiny vital, in our opinion, vital aspects of what it means to perform a test. Well, what we're really doing is we're listing all the kinds of things that you have to internalize in some way eventually if you're going to get really, really good at testing. If you're going to take testing very seriously, then these are the things that eventually you have to internalize. Now, that learning process takes a lot longer than reading the 60 pages will.
As long as that takes.
Well, it's
Uh,
At
deliberate
the same
practice.
time, one more thing I want to say though, at the same time, we try very hard in our training when we lay out this pathway that we're talking about to, and this is a really difficult trick that I think good trainers have to do, is we try to be anti-authoritarian about it. So we say, here's the path, but we're also trying to get people to understand you may find a variation of this path, a different path that works better for you than our path. And we must always try to convey that or create that relationship with our student where they don't feel disempowered. They don't feel like they're just putting their feet where we tell them to put their feet, but they are trying to put their feet in places they think are interesting, and so that they feel that they're creating their own path to the degree that they want to create their own path. So it's a bit of a balancing act for us because we certainly have many opinions about what good testing is. But to be an excellent student of testing, you got to be like Ben Fellows. You got to be like Maaike. You got to be like Karen. You have to be someone who says, like, I'll listen to people, but I'm going to do what I think is right in my own work. That's really the fundamental spirit of rapid software testing. The tester is always in charge of their own work, or else you cannot be responsible.
Mhm.
the key
Thank
thing
you.
that we can give people from our training that we can't give them from the book is the experience of confronting some problems in real software or in real circumstances where they have to bang into a problem, encounter it, get the exercise of trying to work it out and build themselves accordingly. That's the difference between a class and a book. It's also the difference between learning stuff and reading about stuff. Reading about stuff helps, but learning it requires engagement with the task at hand.
If you're into educational theory, Michael and I are constructivists, and we're possibly radical constructivists. We're maybe on the edge of what's called radical constructivism. Constructivists don't believe you can actually teach anybody anything. We think all we do is facilitate people teaching themselves.
There's a term that we got from our friend Rob Sabaran called critical incident theory. All right, there's a field of education research which is about that. And I realized after Rob introduced this term to us that that's part of our job. It's to put people into moments where they confront some kind of problem and then work their way around it successfully or unsuccessfully. And to the degree they're successful, we have to praise that. And to the degree that they're unsuccessful, we have to help show them maybe some ways of getting out of that trap that they've stepped into or maybe even created for themselves sometimes.
Thank you. We are going to discuss something little controversial now for higher TRP. Mike, I read your blog about testing with guardrails, where you mention about how difficult it is for testers when they uncover some very important information, but management doesn't always want to hear it. As a critical thinker and someone who is, I believe, also reading, taking testing seriously, what are your impressions about the book so far? Is there something that you would like people to recommend, particularly to address the problem you raised through your blog?
Yeah, in the book it is called fake testing. I call it testing with guardrails, but in the book it's called fake testing.
Mm-hmm.
But to come back to the latter part of your question, what I like about the book the most, and it's gonna sound a little bit crazy, it made me feel less alone.
Okay.
Because there have been times in my testing career when I have truly felt alone, and not literally alone, but alone in the sense that the people around me, mostly management, let's be real, they had very different ideas about what testing can and cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know the book has given me the vocabulary that these people are probably part of the factory school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I really enjoy in the book, that the vocabulary is very precise, because it has given me a framework to nudge my colleagues to talk differently about testing. And currently I work with people who aren't testers at all. But to my surprise, and I was very happy with that, the term testing oracle has really taken off. And a testing oracle is a way to determine if something is a problem. And for
Mm-hmm.
some reason that was very easy to explain and made them go like, oh, this is interesting. We can work with this. So that was cool. Um, yeah, so the book gives me sort of the vocabulary to teach people who aren't testers more about testing, because you guys, Michael and James, you did the legwork of rehashing the concepts over and over again until you have very precise words. And now I can use those words, thank you, for making my job easier. Um, and what I've also done, because I found the book very inspiring, is I've started my own testing wiki. And I'm taking concepts from the book and I'm rewriting them in my own words and based on my own experiences.
Speaking
And
of
the
which,
wiki, yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I remember reading you mentioning about some approach with reference to the book, which you mentioned is a bit contradictory. Do you
yeah,
want to tell us more about it, please?
yeah. It's the part in the book that where Michael and James say that they are advocates of having independent testing teams, and I have a bit of contrasting experience with that. For one, I've only been in the industry for 15 years. Back then, Agile was already, it had its claws in us, and Scrum had its claws in the industry. So I have never, ever, ever worked in something else than a Scrum team. I have never worked in an independent test team. So I have no mental model what that is even supposed to look like. Yeah. So to get that out of the way. But also, I have good experiences with getting developers into a testing mindset, because you can be in a creation mindset and in a testing mindset. And developers can reach that testing mindset, in my experience. So I've done exploratory testing with the team, where I did the legwork of preparing the charters, the missions, and I've sent people off in pairs to do testing in time boxes. And to my utter surprise, the developers were extremely creative in finding bugs. And it was a good lesson for me, a mirror that I have blind spots, because they found bugs that I had completely missed. So to me, that was very motivating and also humbling, because as a tester, I want to do perfect work, but it showed me that I cannot do perfect work because I'm just a human with my biases and everything. And also, when I was working on my own mobile app, I noticed that I have this problem in myself. So when I was coding, I could not critique my own work.
Mm-hmm.
But then when that was over, when my concentration took a nosedive and I went and get a coffee, I came back and I said, okay, now I'm gonna stop the coding bit and I'm gonna run my code and see what problems I can find. So to me, I feel like I have a little bit more faith that people can change these modalities in their mind. But that isn't to say that as a tester, this is our main mission. We are there to find problems. But other people can sort of unlock that as well.
Thank you. You mentioned something very interesting that you are now building something of your own based on what you learned through the book. Um, I have done QCSD. I had developed QCSD, which is basically what I learned from decades of practicing RST and all the literature I learned from context-driven community. Michael, I believe you were mentioning about this peculiarity of rapid software testing and the spirit of taking testing seriously, of people taking the foundational work and building on top of that. What do you what would you say prepares testers to do this? What is so different about RST and taking testing seriously, which is based on RST, that empowers testers to do this?
No, different from what?
None another.
Well, uh, what we're trying to do with our work in helping people to learn about testing is very similar to what it's like to be a responsible medical trainer, although I don't know enough about medical training to, I haven't experienced it, but I've read a bunch from a bunch of different doctors, primarily a fellow named Atul Gawande. It seems to be the same. I'm not a professional pilot, but I've read about how pilots get trained, and we happen to have in our community a pilot who was a check pilot. That means his job was to evaluate other pilots, and who designed, or not designed, but tested the simulators on which pilots are trained. And what those domains, well, there's a third domain that I do have experience with, and that is parenting. What I'm trying to do as a parent, what the people who are training pilots do, what the people who are training doctors do, is that they're trying to help people learn to be autonomous, skillful, to build on the agency that they should be extended, right? The freedom and the responsibility, that those words have been in our discourse for a long time. I think they got paired together by John Bach, but maybe me too, simultaneously in around 2006 or so. And obviously inspired by people like James and Kim Kaner and Jerry Weinberg. We're trying to help people recognize that they are free, that they are responsible, and with those things, plus agency, they themselves can become experts by learning their craft and by practicing their craft. That's the big message that we've got. And our message is not memorize a list of terms. Our message is not, here's a great way to find a bug. Take a number that you've been told about, add one, subtract one, and now you know how to do boundary testing. Our mission has been to go deeper on all that stuff and to help people recognize that when somebody gives you an assignment, part of your job is to process how that assignment could be incomplete, unclear, ambiguous, and to probe the boundaries of the assignment, not necessarily the boundaries of some input field.
Thank you. Karen, one question. I learned a lot about learning from your chapter, and I feel, particularly in days like this, learning can be quite an overwhelming activity for testers when they are expected to perform, outshine, and still stay relevant in changing times. What would you advise for testers? How should they prioritize what to learn?
Yeah, that is a challenge because there are a number of things to learn. And sometimes you do feel like you're learning all at the same time. It's the product, it's the organization, it's the team that you're working with, it's the technology, it's possibly a different defect tracking tool than you've ever worked on. And like sometimes these things all come at the same time and it can be really overwhelming. And I think I've learned that sometimes you have to skip topics. I know a long time ago, it was a really enjoyable conversation. James and I talked about ripping through books, right? Like I have a stack of 10 books. I need to read them all. I don't have time. I can't read in that sort of linear fashion of like one at a time. And so he and I had a conversation around like, can you get into a book and like rip out, I'm not talking physical ripping, but like just pulling out what you need, like throw it over your shoulder and go to the next and like be able to go through multiple topics and you're learning at the same time and your skill level in each could be really different. I had an experience recently where after writing the chapter on learning, I've been rebooting my career and I've come back to work as a software tester. So I'm not working as a director. I'm not in a management role. I'm working as a tester. And I've had to sort of do it all over again and go through some of those beginning stages. And I do feel like I'm going through a lot of learning. But at a meta level, I was also thinking about the chapter, and I had a number of conversations with James, and he'd asked me, like, what have you been doing these last couple of years? Where you been? Where'd you go? Well, I was dealing with a lot of personal things, and that's fine. But on the side, I was also learning a lot about photography. It was a hobby of mine that I went back to. And so sort of recently, like in the last 2 months, I've been asking myself the question, how did you learn photography? And how does that parallel to learning testing? I actually have like a very, very sketchy, like any tester could tear this thing apart. A very sketchy website. It's just like Karen Nicole Johnson photography. The only page on there that I'd really reference right now is I did the meta excavation of how did I learn? And it was like, it kind of boiled down to a few things that I'm really happy to share, which is like find a master, right? Find somebody in the field that you really trust who can either work as your mentor or at least you've been to their training or at least they're somewhat comfortable that you can go back with a testing problem and say, I'm struggling with this, can you guide me through, right? And like have those masters that you admire their work and you're learning from them. But then as I wrote about and learning about photography, it's like I took a lot of classes. I've been to a bunch of workshops. I've gone out live in the field and like go to shooting, photo shooting sessions together. There's been books, there's been tutorials, there's been an online forum. It's a whole combination. I wouldn't say, oh, there was one and that nailed it. And the other thing that I realize is when you get overwhelmed, and any of us do in learning, I've kind of peeled back to what's the next one thing you want to learn in photography now, which is sort of the same thing in testing. Like, what's the one next thing that I want to learn now? Because whenever I tell myself I have a lot to do, I'm not going to get anything done because I'm just going to feel overwhelmed. So if I can pick one thing, and then, after that, you'll just pick the next. But I think learning is, and it's different for everyone. I've come to realize I'm very much a visual learner, which is why mind maps have always been so important to me. But I've also had this experience. I've been wanting to bring it back to James and probably to Michael too, which is sometimes I share heuristics with people and I get that blank look of like, I have no idea what this is. And I try to look into that and say, okay, some things work for some people and some things don't work for other people. Like to Michael's experience on music, that's cool that he goes out and he can jam. I don't care how many people try to teach me how to cook. It's a horrible situation. It doesn't go well. I'm undermotivated. Nothing good comes out of it. I've never improvised on a recipe. And I have to follow it strictly because there's no skills there, right? Like there's nothing. Just nothing there. So I had wanted to use this word before. I think you asked what's so different about RST. It's deliberate practice. So if you take an RST class, you are not sitting in the back row in some boring hotel convention center thinking that you're going to hide in the last row and never get called upon. You will be in a team and you will actually test and you will be very active and you're going to learn. Like it's not a training. I don't know, get into the words. It's not a training class. It's a learning experience. It's not like other classes.
Thank you. I would ask one question. I would like James to answer this one and also Michael. So looking forward, how do you envision the relationship between human tester and AI tools evolving? And what does taking testing seriously look like in a world where AI is likely to be infused across the entire SDLC?
The watchword for us is responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask anybody to do something who's not you, and you have no idea if that person is qualified to do that thing, and you just tell them to do it, are they taking responsibility or are you taking responsibility? If you're working with a child and you tell a child to do some important work, you cannot let that child be fully responsible for their own work. If this is going to affect anything beyond them, of course. You must take responsibility. If you convince a 4-year-old child to commit armed robbery, they're never going to put that kid in jail. They're going to put you in jail. No matter what you say, like, well, I wasn't even in the bank. I was waiting in the car outside. They're going to still arrest you, the adult. They're not going to arrest the child because the child cannot take responsibility for its own actions. AI cannot take responsibility for its own actions. It cannot be accountable. It is a tool. So, and also OpenAI is going to say it's not us. Like, you mean you committed suicide while using our tool? Well, you must have violated the terms of use then. It's not our fault. And we just put an untested tool out there for people to play with. Who can blame us? So in a world where people keep trying to evade responsibility, our approach to testing, which is why I called the book Taking Testing Seriously, is to accept responsibility. It's all about responsibility. So I have to take responsibility for anything the AI does. And to do that, I need to understand what it does. And to do that, I need to keep up with it. So one of the key heuristics of working with AI and testing is to do it in small gulps instead of huge gulps. Because you can very easily, I did this just the other day. I asked Claude for something in testing to analyze a list of risks, and it gave me a 13,000 word response. And I'm like, I don't want to review this response. I want to just accept it. But I cannot be a responsible tester and accept that response without carefully reviewing it. So the AI has just created a bunch of work for me. But it's easier to deal with if you go in little jumps instead of asking AI to do a whole bunch of stuff all at once. So one of our recommendations is to start with simple prompts, and then refine the prompt instead of memorizing or saving these massive complex prompts, because that's what some people recommend. Like, oh, take your prompt from our book of amazing prompts and drop it in, and this prompt has like 1,000 words in it, and it's telling you to do all these things, and then the AI will instantly produce this amazing result. Well, you're going to get a result that's probably not something that you will understand. You won't understand what its real process was. And so a lot of it, I think, is it's like, imagine it's a cart, it's a bunch of horses pulling a carriage. And so you've got a team of 6 horses, they're pulling this carriage, and then you got to keep those horses under control. And if you don't know how to do it, if you drop the reins or the horses get spooked, then they're just going to drag you through the countryside. Your carriage will turn over. So I think a lot of people who say, oh, look at my amazing AI-based testing, I just have this mental image of them being dragged across the desert by a bunch of horses. They're saying, look at me. Like, yeah, but I have no idea. You don't even know what you're doing. And so how am I supposed to trust what you're doing?
Thank you, James. Michael, any insights from your side?
No, I don't have insights. Oh, wait, no, maybe I do. James mentioned 13,000 words. 13,000 words, which is on the order of, what, a seventh of our book. It took, from the time James signed the contract, it took us 55 months and a day, if my recollection of his blog post is correct, to come
That's
out
right.
with did we ever get a final word count on the book, James? It's just a piece.
I don't recall. It's 507 pages.
So
But I don't remember the word count.
Some pages are blank, some pages have very little text on them, some pages have a lot.
You
I
mean
would
I had
estimate
the
that,
option of putting blank pages in my book? Now you're telling me I could
yeah,
have
then
had
you
it
could have made it
even more pages in my book.
550 pages. Well, each of the words in that book is pretty carefully chosen. And it took that amount of time to come out with something on the order of somewhere between a tenth and a seventh of what's in that book. How good is that ever going to be when there's also no human thought in behind it, just a bunch of words that were associated with each other? How good is that 13,000 words going to be? Especially when the only meaning that is in it, the only actual meaning that is in it, is the meaning that you take from it. But it wasn't generated and carefully curated by a human. It was generated in the space of a few seconds by a bunch of stochastic processes that reproduce strings of text that are similar to strings of text that other people have produced before.
We did try an
How
experiment,
good
Michael.
we did.
Remember the
So,
experiment? At the end of the book, after I finished the book and delivered it, I wrote a prompt to generate one of the chapters of the book and said, okay, like here's the prompt. Now you write the chapter 3 of the book that took me 4 months to write with Michael's help. And it came up with a bunch of stuff that was remixed from, I guess, blog posts that I had made, but none of the ideas that we synthesized for this book for the first time, or no other original ideas, were included. The AI just shuffled around a bunch of stuff that was already out there on the list, on the net, and came up with no insights, nothing like the things that we came up with when we were struggling through this ourselves. But it certainly did come up with a bunch of breezy things that I've said before, and Michael has said before on our blogs. Yeah, it was able to do that.
think of it as a sewer pipe, right? You don't know what you're going to get out of it.
So that's why you
But
got
the
to stay on
chance,
top of it.
the
And
chance that it's going to be clean, potable water that you get out of a sewer pipe, the chance is relatively low. Or even, and I'm talking about a storm sewer, right? When it rains, what do you get out of a storm sewer? A flood. You get water, but you get a lot of crap in with the water. That's not necessarily potable water. If you want to drink that water, you'd better filter it and refine it. That is where the magic is. The magic is not in the stuff that the AI generates that looks pretty interesting and intriguing. The magical part happens when people start the real magic, not the fake magic. The real
so
magical
you're,
part starts when real
Michael,
people start to interpret it.
are you saying that the role of a human in using AI in testing is to be a sort of sewage treatment facility so that clean water comes out? That's an
Certified
interesting
as filter.
image.
It's not a very well, because James, when you started to say shuffle, I think you said shuffled,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I didn't think that sh was going to go that way. I thought that wasn't the word I thought you were going to use, because you sort of stumbled on this
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I need to say something in response to what Micah said, though, because I love what you said, Micah, about how your experience with developers is they were doing great testing. I just want to say that a big part of our point about that is we need to resolve conflicts of interest. So you can have a great doctor who does a study and they're paid a bunch of money by a drug company to publish that study. And the drug company can even say like, "Oh, we want you to be totally honest."
Objective.
And in fact, I was an expert witness on a court case once, and the lawyer said, you have to tell the absolute truth of your opinion. I don't want you to change your opinion at all based on what any of the lawyers here hope that you will say. You have to give your total honest opinion. Never compromise on that. And I said, well, what if my opinion isn't what will help the case? And he said, oh, we'll just get another expert. So we'll just fire you and we'll get another expert. So there's a conflict of interest. So sure, developers can think like testers if they choose to for whatever reason and for whatever period of time. But fundamentally, the work of development is to create stuff. And fundamentally, if you say, I want you to stop creating stuff for the next 5 days and just test, they'll go 5 days. Don't you mean like 5 hours? Like that's about all I'm going to put up because I got stuff to do. And I go like, oh, well, the thing about an independent test team is I do have 5 days to be an independent tester. In fact, I have any number of days to be an independent tester. I just focus on testing. So the incentives for an independent tester are aligned in terms of I want to find bugs. Whereas for a developer, they're not in alignment. So even though you can overcome that, there's always a little bit of a headwind that a developer has when being asked to test.
That said, I will also want to emphasize something else that Maaike pointed to, which is developers are wonderful testers. You can find out for sure by getting a developer to test some other developer's work, because developer tester will go medieval on developer maker of things. The issue is not that developers are bad testers. Anybody who watches a developer at work will recognize immediately that developers are pretty good testers by and large. Otherwise, they wouldn't get anything built. What they're not great at, what nobody is great at, is looking at their own work at critical distance from it. You can't do that, with the exception of time. As Maaike, you mentioned that too. If you're away from the work for a little while and you come back to it, that affords some distance from it. But in the moment that you're building something, you can be aware of many problems, but not the kind of problems that somebody who is at some remove from you will notice and report.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I agree that testers should be independent and developers, by and large, have a different goal. But to me, it was interesting that I could tickle their brains in such a way that they got out of their normal role, even if it was just for an afternoon, and that it was very powerful in that sense.
I
What
loved
was
how
the
you say
assignment
that.
you? Yeah, me too. What was the assignment that you
I
gave
just
them?
love how you say that, Maaike, because I mean, there's a really nuanced thing that you're saying,
Which is tickling their brains, or
which is that you say that you frame it as a discovery that you made, as something that
yeah,
surprised you. Now, this
yeah,
is not best practice imperialism talking. This is you talking about discovering the dynamics of software development. And if when people talk like that, Michael and I don't argue with that. We're excited about that. Like, let's if everyone is turning software development dynamics into a personal discovery process, then we'll start sharing ideas about skills and heuristics, and we can have conversations about it. And that's what we're trying to do. But a lot of times this turns into Atlassian style. Oh, therefore let's fire all the testers because we find that only developers who when you burn their ships, only then will they fight with motivation and testers are like the ships that we don't want the developers to retreat to. So therefore, it's a best practice to give them no choice. You either die or you fight. And we
Maaike, I'd
don't
love to
think that's
hear.
a responsible way to talk about this stuff.
I
I'd
really
love to hear
love this.
specifically what you told them. But if you can do that real quick.
Yeah. So I basically gave them a very short rundown of the core concept in exploratory testing, so that you still have a focus, that it's not monkey testing, that you don't click at random in the application. So you have to have a mission and you have to have a time box. And I prepared all the charters for them because I thought it was too big of a leap for them to have to create their own test charters. So I prepared all the charters. So the only thing they had to do, and I made them promise me, pinky swear, that they would stick to the focus of the charter. And of course, some people, they can't help themselves, but by and large, most pairs, also a very powerful move, I think, to make people test in pairs, not alone. One of them was the driver, one of them was the documenter, because I also wanted proof of what they were doing. And I told them, go ham, try to find problems. And we had 2 hours of testing and in shorter time blocks and with a little bit of breaks. And of course, there was some bribery with cookies involved and everything. But yeah, it was amazing and everybody loved it. And it became a recurring thing we did every sprint from then on.
That's right. That hits me like the Christmas story.
Yeah.
That's just,
Yeah.
oh,
Timing.
it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I wish we could continue this conversation for another 1 hour more, but for the benefit of time, I would quickly check if we have questions from the audience. They are all apparently very curious to talk to you. Any question from the audience? There is a huge chat, so I really can't go in to pick questions out. Anybody? Any questions you want to ask? Lee, go for it.
Cool. So my question is to Michael and James. You both worked together on the Taking Testing Seriously book. I was wondering, what area did you disagree on the most, or what concept do you not actually align the most on, or causes the most arguments?
Well, I love that question.
Great question.
We developed this book in hundreds of hours of debate. And we had to develop a protocol of debating so that we would stay friends while doing it. And because sometimes Michael says, like, I don't like it. And I go, why don't you like it? And he goes, I don't know. I just don't like it. So we had to develop a protocol where he would flag something and I would give him the space to think about it instead of jumping all over him, because I'm really defensive about my own writing, as one might imagine. And I did the first draft of all the writing that we did in the first half of the book. And then that was the iron. And then it turned into chromium steel when Michael would go over it and we would argue about every sentence of this thing. So everything was hard fought.
You're missing one step, James, and that is that I would do a first draft of a chapter and then you'd throw it out. You surely remember those.
Well, that is true. I guess I blocked out that memory, but you did several times try to submit writing that I tried to ignore as best I could, and I was mostly successful.
Yeah.
So we fell into a process where and Michael allowed me to do this, and this is why I absolutely love this man, is that he realized that I need to write the first draft in order to be connected with the work. And then I had to have the patience to just argue and argue. Now, so we just generally argued about every single thing. And Michael likes to use more words and sentences. I like to use fewer words and sentences. There's that kind of thing. But the one argument for me that stands out is that I wrote a sentence about what's normal. And Michael challenged that sentence, and we got into a big argument about normality, and that turned into a whole new section of that chapter that we called Your New Normal, which is the 7 different kinds of normal. And these 7 different kinds of normal were things that we had known, but we had never realized that we knew. You know, kind of a lot of it is that it's like you know something, but you don't realize you know it until you argue about it with someone, and then it all comes out. And I'm proud of that section.
Them? Yeah, that was a
and you
and
gave
it wasn't exactly
Michael came up with the peanuts mnemonic. Pleasing, easy, allowed is the A. Pleasing, easy,
allowed. Natural versus contrived.
Us versus
them. I think that right. I think I'm pretty proud of us versus them. I think, or maybe you.
Yeah. And the
See, part of the whole process, Lee, is after the argument. This is a very common phenomenon. Neither one of us can remember who thought it up, unless somebody realizes that it was a bad idea after all, in which case the other person.
Well,
that's how that works.
That. Yeah, it is maddening sometimes because I like to get credit for ideas that I actually have, but our debates are so tangled that I have sometimes taken credit for things that turned out Michael actually forced me to understand, and so I feel bad about that. But it's just hard to remember, you know, when you have.
It has never happened the other way, of course. James has never had an idea that I wanted to take credit for. Never, ever, not even once.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I in a weird way.
Well, yes. Only because it's lying, but there you go.
We also, I should say this, we disagree about, you know, there is a big thing that Michael and I disagree about. I like to say that AI is doing thinking, and Michael hates when I say that. He absolutely hates it. Also, I think it's okay to talk about test cases, and Michael would just assume that I never mention the word test case ever again. So he thinks it's a toxic term, and I don't think it's toxic. I just think it shouldn't be central. So we have things like that we argue about periodically, but mostly we're in alignment. You can't be working with a guy for 20 years not be in really strong alignment, especially if you argue with him all the time and he's still your friend. And that is very precious, very precious.
Okay, one more question. One more question before we close. Do we have one more question? Okay, if not, I have been requested to ask this. Will there be any Christmas discount on the book so it reaches the masses? James, Michael.
It's not up to me. I don't have any control over those things. Wiley does what Wiley does. And it's also different in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
You can, however, ask the publisher. That's one thing. And another thing is that James and I are working out some kind of protocol by which if people want signed copies, it's relatively easy for either one of us to sign a book and to send it to you. And we have amounts of that. My experience so far is that it costs marginally more for people to receive it than it would cost for them to get it off a large company that sells books. Now, if you want copies signed by 2 people, that tends to be more complicated and even more expensive, but that's possible too. But the other thing is that if you've got a volume discount thing that you would like to address, the publisher has advised me that they will entertain that. So
Okay.
keep those cards and letters coming, and talk to the people in academia, because when they buy books, they buy a lot of books. So we'd be very happy if we got some runway for the book that way.
Understood.
And not just for the sales part, just for getting people to learn testing in academic contexts. That would be
Absolutely.
great.
A lot of things could be done right from the beginning there. That would be a very huge favor on the industry. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I really enjoyed this conversation with you. And to those who have not read the book yet, please consider reading it. Read it twice, thrice, set up a groups, read it in groups. I'm very honored to have contributed my little thoughts in there. I believe you will be doing yourself a very big favor if you understand even just 50% of what book is trying to convey. And with that hope and wish that a lot of things will change for good for testing and meaningful work will happen more and more. I wish you all a very great time. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and let's rock 2026 with things we learn from taking testing seriously. Thank you so much and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy
you.
festive season
Happy
to
holiday.
all who are
You too,
festive
Meg.
in.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Maaike. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you all.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Griffin.